My name is Claire Bennett. I was 31 years old the day I stood in the middle of a polished hotel lobby in Naples, Florida, holding the handle of a scratched gray suitcase while a woman at the front desk kept saying, "I'm so sorry. Miss Bennett, I'm not seeing a reservation under your name." I remember the lobby very clearly because humiliation has a way of sharpening small details. The floor was cream-colored stone. There were oversized arrangements of white orchids near the entrance. Everything smelled faintly like citrus and expensive sunscreen. Behind the glass wall facing the water, I could see late afternoon light sliding across the pool deck. Families were checking in around me in soft linen clothes and sandals that looked more expensive than they needed to be. People were laughing. Bellmen were moving luggage. A little boy in a navy polo was dragging a stuffed shark by one fin across the floor. And there I was, standing still, while the woman behind the desk clicked through the system again, like she might be able to fix what she already knew was not a glitch. A few feet away, my mother stood with one hand resting on the strap of her handbag, looking past me toward the ocean view as if the sunset deserved more attention than her daughter. My sister Vanessa leaned against the edge of the concierge counter with a drink in her hand and the kind of smile that always looked pleasant from a distance and cruel up close. The front desk clerk glanced at me, then at my mother, then back at the screen. "I'm sorry," she said again, quieter this time. "I only see 3 room reservations attached to your family group." I looked at the list. She turned slightly toward me. 1 suite under my Uncle Richard's name. 1 room under my mother's. 1 Ocean View King under Vanessa and her husband, Brian. Nothing under mine. For half a second, I still tried to make it normal. I asked, "Could it be under Bennett without my first name?" She checked. Then under Claire M. Bennett. Then under my mother's booking. Nothing. I could feel people nearby pretending not to listen in the very specific way strangers do when they absolutely are. I turned toward my mother because even then, even after years of knowing better, some part of me still expected her to step in and say there had been a mistake. She did not. She adjusted the sleeve of her cardigan and said, "I'm sure they'll work it out." That sentence landed harder than I expected because it was not concern. It was a performance of concern. She had perfected that tone years earlier. It was the voice she used when she wanted to look reasonable in front of other people while staying far enough away from the problem that no responsibility could stick to her. Then Vanessa took one slow sip from her glass and said, with a little shrug, "They're not going to work it out, Mom." The front desk clerk straightened. I looked at my sister. Vanessa met my eyes and smiled. "We didn't book one for you." She said it lightly, almost casually, as if she were reminding me about dinner plans. For a second, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. Not because it was out of character, because it was too direct. My family usually preferred polished cruelty. Things said in side comments, small exclusions that could be denied later, a joke that became your fault if you reacted like it hurt. But Vanessa had an audience, and she liked an audience. She tilted her head slightly and added, "I mean, come on, Claire. A failure doesn't deserve a resort vacation." There are sentences that sound different once they leave somebody's mouth. They become larger than the room, heavier than the voice that said them. That was one of those sentences. A failure doesn't deserve a resort vacation. I heard a suitcase wheel stop somewhere behind me. I saw the clerk's face change in a way she probably hoped I would not notice. My mother did not correct her. She did not say Vanessa had gone too far. She did not say, "Of course Claire has a room." She said nothing. And that silence told me more than the sentence did. If you're listening to this and you've ever had a family member smile right in your face while setting you up to feel small, then you probably already know this kind of silence. It is never empty. It is agreement dressed up as restraint. I set my passport down on the counter and picked it back up again. That tiny motion bought me maybe 2 seconds. Enough time to steady my voice. Enough time to understand that this had not happened by accident on a busy holiday weekend. My mother had texted me the flight details. She had sent the hotel address. She had reminded everyone to be downstairs by 6 for Thanksgiving dinner the next day. She had watched me board a flight from Austin and come all the way there with a suitcase and no room waiting. This had been arranged. Not carelessly, deliberately. I looked at my mother first. She finally turned toward me, but her expression already had that practiced weariness in it, like I was on the verge of making something difficult. Then I looked at Vanessa. She was still smiling. And I said, very calmly, "Then I'll leave." That was the only part she had not planned for. Her smile moved, just slightly. Not gone, just disrupted. I think she expected me to argue, or cry, or ask what I was supposed to do. My mother probably expected me to go into the same role I had been pushed into since my mid-20s, the easier daughter, the one who absorbed the insult first and processed it later in private. Instead, I reached for the handle of my suitcase. The front desk clerk said, "Ma'am, if you'd like, I can help you find availability nearby." It was kind of her, and that almost made it worse. I nodded and said, "Thank you. I'll take care of it." Vanessa gave a short laugh and said, "Don't be dramatic." I remember that line exactly because it was so familiar. They push, you react. Then they call the reaction the problem. I looked at her one last time. "No," I said. "This is me leaving." Then I turned and walked toward the glass doors. No one stopped me. That part mattered. It still matters when I think about it. No one said, "Claire, wait." No one said, "This is ridiculous." No one came after me with a room key or an apology or even a weak excuse. The automatic doors opened and warm air hit my face. Outside, the driveway loop was lined with palms wrapped in tiny white lights for the holiday weekend. A valet was helping an older couple out of a black SUV. Somewhere farther down near the pool area, I could hear music and the soft break of laughter. The sky had that bright coastal gold in it that makes everything look easier than it is. I kept walking until I reached a bench near the entrance and sat down with my suitcase beside my knees. For a minute, I just stared at the circular drive. I did not cry. People always assume that means I was strong in some dramatic way. That is not how it felt. It felt more like something inside me had gone very still. Like the argument had finally ended, not because I had won it, but because I had stopped expecting different people to become better versions of themselves. My phone was in my hand before I consciously remember taking it out. I opened the airline app first. Holiday fares were terrible. I checked anyway. Then I opened rideshare and booked a car to the airport. Only after that did I sit back and think about how I had ended up there. My family had been practicing this story about me for years. I was the daughter who did not follow the approved route, the sister who never quite looked established enough in photographs, the one who worked for herself, which sounded unstable to people who confused predictability with worth. I built content strategy for small tech companies and healthcare clients. That sentence meant something in my world. It paid my rent. It covered my insurance. It filled my calendar. But to my mother and Vanessa, it did not sound impressive enough at a country club table, so they treated it like a phase I had somehow stretched into adulthood. Vanessa's life, on the other hand, photographed beautifully. Vanessa had a husband in commercial lending, a daughter in private school, a stucco house in a neighborhood with a fountain at the entrance, and a habit of posting grateful captions under professionally lit pictures of things other people quietly helped finance. My mother loved that life because it was easy to explain, easy to show, easy to point to when she wanted to say one daughter was doing well. I had spent enough Thanksgivings and birthdays and summer dinners hearing little lines like, "Vanessa has always been more settled," or "Claire is still figuring things out," to know that by the time I hit 31, the role had calcified. Still, a part of me had gone on that trip because my Uncle Richard invited me personally. He was my mother's older brother, and he was one of the only people in the family who ever asked real questions. Not performative ones, real ones. "How is work going? Are you charging enough? Do you like your clients? Are you sleeping?" He had called 2 weeks earlier and said he wanted everybody together for Thanksgiving at the resort because he was tired of everyone acting like family only counted when it was convenient. I almost said no. Then he told me, "Come anyway. Let me at least buy you a decent meal and a view." So I went. And 2 days before the flight, when my mother sent the room list and my name was not on it, I texted her, "I don't see my room." She replied 10 minutes later, "The hotel is sorting out a couple details. Just come." I should have heard the warning in that. But families train you to doubt yourself in such ordinary ways that sometimes even obvious danger arrives wearing a familiar face. My rideshare app showed the driver was 5 minutes away. I stared at the little car moving toward me on the map and felt something strange begin to settle over me. Not relief exactly. Not anger either. Clarity, maybe. The kind that comes when humiliation gets so clean in public that denial is no longer possible. Inside the lobby, through the glass, I could still see movement. Staff crossing. Guests checking in. My mother's pale cardigan near one of the columns. Vanessa's bright dress near the bar. Then my phone rang. Uncle Richard. I almost let it go to voicemail. I did not have the energy to explain anything without sounding more affected than I wanted to, but I answered. Hi, I said. Claire, he said, and his voice was calm in a way that made me sit up straighter. Where are you? Outside. A short pause. Are you leaving? Yes. Stay where you are. I looked back at the building. I really don't want to make this into something. Another pause. This one shorter. You didn't, he said. They already did. I didn't say anything. Then he added, I was on the balcony above the lobby. I heard enough. For the first time since I walked out, I felt my chest tighten. He continued in the same steady tone. Do not get in that car yet. I'm coming down. I looked at my phone screen after the call ended, then at the driveway in front of me, then back toward the hotel entrance. And that was the moment I understood the story was not over when I walked out of the lobby. It had only changed hands. Richard came outside less than 2 minutes later, still wearing the light blue shirt and linen jacket he had on during lunch. He did not look angry in the loud way people expect anger to look. He looked precise, focused, the way certain men look when they have already made a decision and are now just moving toward the part where everyone else catches up. He sat down beside me on the bench, glanced once at my suitcase, then at the phone in my hand. Tell me exactly what was said, he said. So I did. And when I finished, he nodded once, slow and thoughtful, like he was putting one final piece into place. Then he looked back at the hotel and said, All right. I did not know it yet, but the next 24 hours were about to undo far more than a holiday dinner. And the people who thought they had humiliated me in public had no idea they had just done it in front of the only witness in that family who still cared about truth more than appearances. Richard did not say much on that bench after I repeated Vanessa's words back to him. He asked one clarifying question, which was whether my mother had known before I arrived that no room had been booked for me. I said, She sent the itinerary. My name wasn't on it. I texted her. She told me to come anyway. He nodded once. That was it. No dramatic speech. No immediate call in front of me. No performance of outrage. He just sat there for a few seconds looking out toward the driveway while cars curved in and out under the awning. Then he said, Cancel the ride to the airport. I looked at him. Richard, I don't want you dragged into this. His mouth moved very slightly, not quite a smile. Claire, I have been dragged into this for years. I just stopped pretending I didn't notice. That sentence stayed with me because it was the first time anyone in the family had said out loud what I had quietly suspected for a long time. My mother and Vanessa liked to behave as if their version of reality was the only one in circulation. But other people had seen things. They had just chosen convenience over interruption. Richard took out his phone and made 2 calls. He spoke the way people with real money often do when they are not trying to impress anyone. Quietly. Clearly. No wasted words. When he finished, he said, You have a room here now. Different booking. Same floor. You are still joining dinner tomorrow. I started to object. He cut me off gently. I'm not asking you to fight with anyone, he said. I'm asking you not to disappear so they can rewrite this before dessert tomorrow. That was the exact language he used. Rewrite this. And the reason it landed so hard was because that had always been my family's real talent. Not cruelty by itself, narrative control. Vanessa could say something vicious, and by the next day the family version would be that she was under stress. My mother could stand by and let something ugly happen, and by the next week the story would become that she was caught in the middle. If I reacted at all, even privately, then I became the difficult one. Too sensitive, too intense, too ready to assume the worst. I had spent years inside that system. I was 24 the first time I understood how permanent my role in the family was becoming. Up until then, I still believed adulthood would level things out. I thought once Vanessa and I were both grown, our mother would stop comparing us, like one of us had won and the other had not. That did not happen. Vanessa was 2 years older than me and had always been easier to display. She was polished early, pretty in a way older women like to describe as effortless, even though I knew how much effort she put into it. She understood social rooms instinctively. She could talk to somebody for 3 minutes and know exactly which version of herself would make them like her fastest. I was not like that. I was friendly enough, but quieter, more literal, better one-on-one than in groups. I noticed tone faster than I noticed status, which in my family was treated like a flaw. My mother used to say things like, Vanessa just knows how to move through the world. It always sounded like a compliment until you heard the part underneath it. And you, Claire, do not. When Vanessa got engaged at 27, my mother acted like the family had entered a new tier of legitimacy, Brian worked in banking. His parents belonged to the kind of church where everyone smiled with their teeth and wore pressed clothes to Sunday brunch. Their wedding was held at a vineyard outside San Antonio with string lights over the dance floor and custom cocktail napkins with their initials in gold. I was happy for her. At least in the honest, basic way, one sister can be happy that another person has found the life she wanted. What I was not prepared for was how quickly her marriage would become a measuring stick used against me. At that wedding, I was seated at a back table with two teenage cousins and my great-aunt Elaine, who fell asleep before the cake was cut. I remember looking at the escort card in my hand and thinking it had to be an accident. Then I looked across the reception and saw my mother at the front with Brian's parents, Vanessa glowing under candlelight, photographers everywhere, and I understood it was not an accident. I was being placed. My mother found me by the coffee station later that night and said, "You know how these things work, sweetheart. Married couples first. Immediate presentation matters." Immediate presentation. That phrase told me more about her than she probably intended. I said, "I'm immediate family." And she gave me that soft, exhausted look she used whenever she wanted me to feel childish. Not in the same way tonight. That was how it always happened. Not with one huge rejection at first. With 100 smaller ones delivered calmly enough that if I objected, I looked dramatic. When I left my in-house marketing job 3 years later to freelance full-time, the gap widened. I did not leave because I was unstable or impulsive. I left because I was good enough to. I had built relationships with clients who were ready to keep working with me directly. I had a spreadsheet, savings, a 6-month plan. I knew my rent, my insurance, my software costs, my tax estimates. It was not reckless. It was measured. But to my mother, anything without a title she could repeat at lunch sounded temporary. She asked me, "You quit a real job to make captions for the internet?" That was how she described it to other people too, as if I had wandered into a hobby and called it a career. The truth was less flashy and much more solid. I wrote launch copy, email sequences, site messaging, brand voice guides, investor deck narratives, campaign structures. I helped small companies explain what they did in ways that made customers trust them. It was practical, detailed work. Not glamorous. Not especially photogenic. But it paid. And over time, it paid well. What my family never understood was that I liked the quiet of it. I liked that my work lived in documents and deadlines and clean revisions. I liked that if I did it well, it made somebody else's operation run more clearly. I liked invoices getting paid. I liked building a client roster without needing to impress a room first. But none of that photographed well at Thanksgiving. Vanessa's life photographed beautifully. My mother loved beautiful evidence. So every holiday became an exercise in subtle placement. Vanessa and Brian with the house updates, the school photos, the kitchen renovation, the beach club membership, their daughter Lily, in little dresses with velvet bows and private school recital programs, Brian talking mortgages and rates and neighborhoods, with whichever relative was most eager to feel informed. Then me. "How's your little business? Still working from home? That flexibility must be nice. You're lucky you can keep your expenses low." There is a particular kind of condescension reserved for women whose lives are stable but not visibly status approved. People do not call you unsuccessful outright. They just speak to you like you are one accident away from becoming a lesson. At first, I corrected them. Then I stopped. Partly because explaining myself never changed the category they had already assigned me to, and partly because I began to realize something difficult and strangely freeing. They did not misunderstand me because my life was unclear. They misunderstood me because misunderstanding me was useful. As long as I was the unfinished daughter, Vanessa could be the finished one. As long as I looked less established, my mother could keep telling herself her value system was working. As long as I occupied that role, nobody had to examine the real structure holding up the life they admired. Because by the time I turned 31, I knew things they assumed I did not. I knew Richard had been helping my mother for years, quietly, not because she was destitute. Because her taste had always lived slightly above her actual means, and because she had never met a temporary patch she could not mistake for permanence. I knew he had stepped in during Vanessa and Brian's home purchase too. Not by buying them a house outright, nothing that obvious, but through the kinds of support arrangements wealthy families use when they want to preserve an appearance without publicly calling it rescue. A backstop here, a payment there, a flexible interpretation of just until things settle. Vanessa talked as if she and Brian had simply built a beautiful life through discipline and standards. What she had actually built was a polished dependency structure with excellent landscaping. Richard never told me this directly in one big confession. I put it together the way people put together most family truths. Through side comments, timing, invoices accidentally mentioned, expressions held half a second too long, and one conversation 3 years earlier when he asked me over lunch whether I had an emergency fund. I told him I had 8 months of expenses saved if I stripped things down. He nodded and said, "Good. Nobody claps for boring solvency, but it saves more lives than charisma." That was such a Richard sentence that I laughed. Then he said, almost to himself, "I wish more people in this family understood the difference between wealth and support." At the time, I did not ask what he meant. I did not need to. I could feel the shape of it. That was one reason he and I got along. He did not require me to perform surprise at truths I already understood. There were other reasons, too. He had built his money slowly in logistics and commercial property, and because of that, he distrusted showy people. He liked order, records, contracts. He respected quiet competence more than charm. And unlike most of the family, he had never once mistaken my calmness for weakness. When I was 29, he referred one of his portfolio companies to me for messaging work after hearing me explain, at a family dinner no one else was really listening to, why a healthcare startup's website sounded untrustworthy. I did not know he had been paying attention until 2 weeks later when he emailed me an introduction. That one project led to another and then another. I did not become rich from it. This was not that kind of story. But I became steady, which to me mattered more. My rent stopped feeling like a threat. My savings grew. My client base matured. I learned what to charge without apologizing. I built a life that did not need anyone in my family to approve of it in order to function. The sad part is that none of them knew. Not really. Not because I hid it theatrically. Because they never asked enough follow-up questions to understand it. Vanessa once asked me how work was going while checking her reflection in a window. Before I could answer properly, she interrupted to show my mother a bracelet Brian had bought her in Miami. My mother asked me that Christmas whether I was still doing contractor-type work, even though I had explained my business to her more than once. After a while, I stopped translating myself for people committed to staying monolingual in one specific language, visible status. The only person in the family who understood that my life was more solid than it looked was Richard. Which was why, sitting in that resort room later that evening with my suitcase finally open on the luggage rack, I knew Thanksgiving dinner the next night was not going to be about him forcing a scene. It was going to be about him refusing to let them control the meaning of what had happened. The room he booked for me was one floor above the pool with a narrow balcony facing the water. It was elegant in a way I would never pay for myself. Pale curtains, a long upholstered bench by the window, monogrammed towels folded too neatly in the bathroom. On the desk near the television, there was a welcome card with my name typed correctly. That small card almost undid me more than the lobby had. Not because it was lavish, because it was basic. Proof that somebody had considered my arrival and made room for it. I ordered tea from room service, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the quiet settle around me. Then my phone lit up. Mom calling. I watched it ring. Then Vanessa. Then Mom again. I did not answer. A text came through from Vanessa first. "Are you seriously trying to turn Uncle Richard against us over a hotel mix-up?" I read it twice. A hotel mix-up. There it was already. The rewrite. Not what she had said. Not what my mother had allowed. Not the fact that I had been brought there without a room. Just a mix-up. And I was apparently the one weaponizing it. A minute later, another text. "You always make things bigger than they are." That one I almost appreciated for its consistency. Every family has a script. Ours was so well practiced by then they could have printed it on holiday stationery. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the bedspread. I made myself tea. I stood on the balcony and watched the sky darken over the water. Below, tiny groups of people moved between the pool, the restaurant terrace, and the lit garden paths. Everybody looked warm and temporary in vacation clothes. Somewhere downstairs, laughter floated up and disappeared. I thought about leaving again. Really leaving this time. Early flight, no explanation. Let Richard do whatever he wanted without me there. But he had asked me not to disappear. And the longer I sat with that, the more I understood why. Disappearing had always been the role available to me. Absorb the insult. Remove yourself. Let the family continue untouched. Let them call it unfortunate. Let them keep eating under soft lighting while you recover somewhere private and invisible. I was tired of making myself small enough to fit inside their preferred version of me. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted accuracy. Around 9 that night, Richard called. He did not ask if I had answered anyone. He did not tell me what he planned to say at dinner. He only asked, "Will you come tomorrow?" I looked out at the black water beyond the lit pool and said, "Yes." "Good," he said. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "Claire, there's something you need to understand before tomorrow." I waited. His voice stayed calm. People can get used to using money to protect themselves from honest mirrors. The moment that protection shakes, they panic. So whatever happens next, do not let their panic make you doubt what you saw. That was the last thing he said before hanging up. I stood there for a long time afterward with the phone in my hand, thinking about that sentence. Do not let their panic make you doubt what you saw, because that had happened to me before, not once or twice, for years. I would witness something clearly, some insult, some exclusion, some twist of meaning, and then watch it get softened, reframed, excused, or turned back on me until I started questioning my own memory. But not this time. This time there had been a witness above the lobby. This time there had been a front desk clerk, a room list, a missing reservation, a sentence said out loud in public, and my mother's silence standing right beside it. For the first time in a long time, I had facts cleaner than their excuses. And by the next evening, everyone at that table was going to find out what happened when facts were finally allowed to stay in the room. I woke up early on Thanksgiving morning without needing an alarm. For a few seconds, I did not remember where I was. Then I saw the pale curtains, the open suitcase on the bench by the wall, and the folded resort robe hanging on the bathroom door, and the whole thing came back at once. The lobby. Vanessa's voice. My mother standing there doing nothing. Richard on the balcony. I lay still for a minute and listened to the muffled quiet of the hotel. A cart rolled somewhere in the hall. Water ran briefly through pipes in the wall. Far below my balcony, I could hear a few early risers talking near the pool in that subdued vacation tone people use before breakfast. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. 9 missed messages from the family group chat. 3 direct texts from my mother. 2 from Vanessa. 1 from Brian. I did not open any of them right away. Instead, I got up, made coffee from the machine in the room, and stood barefoot by the window while the sky turned clearer over the water. The coffee was stronger than I expected. Bitter. A little burnt. Still, it helped. There is a point in situations like that where emotion stops being useful. You are too aware of what happened to pretend it did not matter, but also too clear to keep spiraling around it. By morning, I was there. I knew the dinner that night was not going to be comfortable. I knew Richard had made some kind of decision. And I knew, more than anything, that whatever happened next, I could not afford to enter the day confused. Not emotionally, not factually. So I sat at the small desk in the room with my coffee and did something very ordinary. I documented everything. I opened my messages and took screenshots. First, my mother's itinerary text from 2 days earlier. The one with the flight details, the resort address, and the note telling everyone to be downstairs by 6 for dinner. Then my text back. "I don't see my room." Then her reply. "The hotel is sorting a few details. Just come." Then the messages from the night before. "Vanessa, are you seriously trying to turn Uncle Richard against us over a hotel mix-up?" Vanessa again. "You always make things bigger than they are." My mother. "Call me." Then, "Claire, this is getting out of hand." Then, "I don't know what Richard thinks he heard, but we need to discuss this before dinner." I took screenshots of all of it and saved them into a folder on my phone. Then I emailed them to myself. Not because I thought there was going to be a lawsuit or some dramatic legal exposure. There was not. But because I had learned something over the years that women in families like mine often learn too late. If people have spent long enough rewriting reality around you, it helps to preserve the clean version before they get better at muddying it. At 8:17, Brian sent another message. "Can we talk privately before tonight? I think this is all being misunderstood." There it was again. Understood wrong, heard wrong, framed wrong, not done wrong. I stared at that sentence for a long moment. Then I set the phone down. By the time I went downstairs for breakfast, I had decided 3 things. First, I was not leaving. Second, I was not arguing with anyone privately in hallways, elevators, or side patios before dinner. Third, I was done volunteering emotional labor for people committed to disrespecting me. That third one mattered most. For years, my family had relied on my ability to carry discomfort in silence. I was the one who absorbed tension so holidays could continue. The one who accepted bad explanations because challenging them would ruin the mood. The one expected to understand everybody else's pressure, insecurity, financial stress, marriage dynamics, image concerns, and social anxieties while my own humiliation was treated like an overreaction. That morning, I realized I had spent too much of my adult life managing other people's comfort at the cost of my own reality. I took a small table on the outdoor breakfast terrace and ordered eggs, toast, and fruit I barely touched. The air was warm enough for short sleeves. The water beyond the hedges looked flat and bright. Families around me were taking photos with iced coffees and little baskets of pastries on the table. For once, I did not envy any of it. My phone buzzed against the table. Mom. I declined the call. A minute later, Richard appeared near the host, stand in a light sweater and pressed khakis, carrying a newspaper he clearly had not read. He saw me, nodded once, and came over. Did you sleep? He asked. Enough. He sat down across from me. Has anyone spoken to you? Only by text. And? I slid my phone across the table so he could see the thread. He read in silence. No visible reaction at first. Then he handed the phone back to me and said, Good. Keep those. I gave a short laugh without humor. I already emailed them to myself. That earned the smallest approving look from him. Smart. A server came by. He ordered black coffee and nothing else. For a minute or two, we sat without speaking. It was not uncomfortable. Richard was one of those people who did not fill silence just to prove he could. Eventually, he folded his hands on the table and said, I'm going to ask you something, and I need the honest answer. All right, if I address this tonight, will you stay in the room? I looked at him carefully. Address it how? He leaned back slightly. Clearly. That word told me almost everything. I took a breath. Yes, I'll stay. He nodded. Good. Then he said something I had not expected. This is not just about the hotel. I did not respond right away because I wanted to hear how much he meant by that. He looked out toward the water for a moment, then back at me. Your mother and sister have spent years mistaking financial cushioning for achievement. I tolerated it longer than I should have. Some of that is on me. I watched his face as he said it. There was no theatrical regret in it, just accuracy. He continued, I convinced myself that helping family quietly was kindness. In some ways it was. In other ways, it was permission. That landed hard because it explained more than he probably knew. Permission. Permission for my mother to keep presenting a bigger life than she could sustain. Permission for Vanessa to speak from a height she had not really built. Permission for both of them to keep looking down on anyone who lived inside ordinary limits. People often think entitlement begins with arrogance. A lot of the time it begins with insulation. You do not notice how fragile your life is if someone else keeps stepping in before the consequences reach you. Richard stirred his coffee once, though he had not added anything to it. I'm not going to humiliate anyone for sport, he said. But I'm also not going to sit at a Thanksgiving table with people who publicly degrade you while privately relying on support they behave as though they earned. I looked down at my cup. The coffee had gone lukewarm. I don't want to be the reason you break with them, I said. You're not, he said immediately. You're the reason I'm finally saying it out loud. That difference mattered more than I can explain. Because when you are the family scapegoat, one of the oldest tricks in the room is making you believe every conflict is your fault simply because it surfaced around you, not because the behavior was wrong, because your pain made it visible. He let that sit for a minute. Then he asked, Will you do one more thing for me? What? Say very little tonight unless I ask you something directly. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. That part shouldn't be hard. His expression shifted just enough to show he understood the joke. I know. Then he stood, smoothed the front of his sweater, and said, Enjoy your day as much as you can. As much as you can turned out to mean very little. I spent the afternoon mostly alone. I walked the edge of the property once, down a tiled path lined with trimmed hedges and hibiscus plants. I sat on my balcony and answered 2 work emails because normal tasks felt strangely comforting. I put on a simple navy dress for dinner around 5 and stood in front of the mirror longer than I needed to, not because I cared what my family thought I looked like, but because I wanted to appear exactly as I felt. Steady. Not glamorous. Not defeated. Just unmistakably composed. Around 5:20, there was a knock at my door. I knew before opening it that it would not be Richard. It was my mother. She stood in the hallway in a cream blouse and pearl earrings, looking like the polished version of concern she had been cultivating my entire life. Her hair was perfectly set. Her lipstick had been redone. If somebody passed us in the hall, they would have seen a calm woman checking in on her daughter before a holiday dinner. That was one of her gifts. She understood staging. I did not invite her in. For a second, she looked annoyed by that. Then she smoothed it over. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked. "We're talking now." Her jaw shifted slightly. "Claire, I really need you not to make tonight worse than it already is." I remember staring at her face and thinking how remarkable it was that she still believed I was the danger in this situation, not Vanessa saying what she said, not the setup itself. Me for refusing to disappear after it. I said, "I'm not the one who made it worse." She exhaled sharply through her nose. Vanessa was out of line. Out of line. Not cruel, not deliberate, not humiliating, just out of line, like she had spoken too casually at a luncheon. I waited. My mother lowered her voice. She was embarrassed. That almost made me laugh. "Embarrassed by what?" I asked. "The room she didn't book for me?" She looked over my shoulder into the room as if a softer angle might be hiding there somewhere. "Things got carried away." "No," I said. "They didn't get carried away. They went exactly where she meant them to go." My mother's face tightened. She took one small step closer and said, "You always do this." "Do what?" "Make one ugly moment define everything." There it was. The family theology in a single sentence. One ugly moment. As if humiliation had a clean perimeter. As if one public insult existed separate from the years that made it possible. I folded my arms. It wasn't one moment. Her eyes changed then. Not softer, harder. "Richard is overreacting," she said, "and I need you to help calm this down before Vanessa and Brian are put in a terrible position." The honesty of that sentence was almost breathtaking. Not Claire. I'm sorry. Not Claire, I should have fixed this. Just Vanessa and Brian are in danger now, and your job is to help. For the first time in the conversation, I felt completely calm. "I'm not calming down consequences for you," I said. She stared at me. Then she said, very quietly, "Do you really want to do this to your niece?" That was the line. The pivot. The moment she tried to place a child between me and the truth, as if I was the one introducing harm into the situation. I looked at her and understood, with a clarity so clean it felt cold, that there would never be a perfect version of accountability she found acceptable. If consequences arrived, she would always frame them as cruelty from someone else. So I answered the only way I could. "I didn't do anything to Lily," I said. "You should go downstairs." For a second, I thought she might slap me. Not because she was a violent person, because her face had emptied in that shocked, furious way some people get when they discover a script has stopped working. Instead, she straightened, pulled dignity back over herself like a coat, and said, "Fine." Then she turned and walked away down the hall without another word. I closed the door and stood with my hand on the knob for a few seconds after she left. My heart was beating hard. Not from fear exactly. More from the effort of staying still while something old and automatic inside me tried one last time to rise up and chase after her, to soften it, to explain, to restore the family weather to something survivable. I did not move. 5 minutes later, another knock came. This time it was Brian. He looked more tired than I had ever seen him. No jacket, just a dress shirt with the top button undone. He kept one hand in his pocket like he was trying to keep it from shaking. "I'm not here to fight," he said, before I could speak. "That makes two of us." He glanced down the hall, then back at me. "I know what Vanessa said was wrong." I said nothing. He rubbed the side of his jaw. "She gets defensive when she feels judged. There are moments when a person reveals the entire architecture of a marriage in one sentence. That was one of them." He was not there to apologize. He was there to explain her, manage her, package her. "Brian," I said, "are you here for her or for you?" He looked at me for a beat too long. Then he answered honestly, "Both." At least that was something. I waited. He lowered his voice. "If Richard is planning to do something tonight, I need you to know Vanessa didn't understand how serious this could become." I almost asked whether he meant serious emotionally or financially, but I already knew the answer. "What exactly do you think could become serious?" I asked. He shifted his weight. "He's been Supportive. Supportive. There was that polished family language again. Supportive. As if support were a weather pattern and not specific money crossing specific lines at specific times. I looked at him and realized he was more afraid than I had understood before. Not afraid of conflict, afraid of exposure. And suddenly I knew something else. He had always understood more about the structure of their life than Vanessa had. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every arrangement, but enough. Enough to panic. I said, "Then you should probably go downstairs too." His mouth opened slightly like he wanted to say more. Then he stopped himself, nodded once, and left. By the time I made it to the private dining room a little before 6, I felt emptied out in the cleanest possible way. Not numb, not weak, stripped down to the facts. The room was already glowing with candlelight and polished glass. Place cards sat at each setting in front of folded napkins. Beyond the windows, the water had gone dark except for a scattering of reflected lights from boats farther out. My place card was there. That detail mattered. A small white card with my name in black script, placed neatly between Richard and one of my cousins. No one said anything when I took my seat. Vanessa was across from me in a dark green dress with gold earrings, smiling too brightly at everyone who entered. My mother sat near the end of the table with the posture of a woman determined to act as though everything remained manageable. Brian looked pale. Wine was poured. Menus were discussed. Aunt Denise complimented the floral arrangement. Someone asked about traffic from the airport. The performance had begun, and underneath it, I could feel something tightening steadily, invisibly, like a wire being pulled through the center of the table. I did exactly what Richard asked. I said very little. I let the room keep talking. I let the silverware move. I let Vanessa laugh once too loudly at something not very funny. I let my mother ask Richard whether he had slept well, as if she had not spent the last hour trying to get me to contain the consequences of her silence. I let the first course come and go, because by then I understood the strategic move was not mine anymore. Mine had already happened. I had stayed. I had documented the truth. I had refused the private rewrite, and now all that was left was the public part. Then, midway through the main course, Richard set down his fork, folded his napkin beside his plate, and stood up. The room changed before he even spoke. Richard did not raise his voice when he stood. He did not tap a glass or ask for everyone's attention because he did not need to. He had been the gravitational center of most family gatherings for as long as I could remember. Not because he was charming in a loud way. Because people understood, whether they admitted it or not, that he was the one person at that table whose approval had practical weight. Conversation stopped almost immediately. The pianist in the next room was still playing something soft and forgettable, but inside the dining room everything else went still. Candlelight moved across the glasses. A server paused just outside the door with a tray in her hands, saw the room's posture, and quietly backed away. Richard rested one hand lightly against the back of his chair and looked around the table before speaking. "I paid for this Thanksgiving because I wanted family together," he said. "Not performative family, actual family, the kind that can sit at one table and meet a basic standard of decency." No one interrupted. My mother's face had already gone careful. Not pale, not panicked yet, just careful. The look of someone who understood a line was approaching and was trying to calculate whether she could still charm her way around it. Richard continued in the same level tone. "Yesterday afternoon, before dinner, before the pool, before any of us sat down together, I watched Claire arrive in the lobby with a suitcase and no room reservation." Vanessa's fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. My mother said, very quickly, "Richard, this really isn't—" He turned his head and looked at her. That was all he did. She stopped talking. Then he said, "I watched the front desk confirm that no room had been booked for her. I watched her stand there while other people listened. I watched you remain silent." His eyes moved from my mother to Vanessa. "And I heard you tell your sister that a failure did not deserve a vacation with this family." No one moved. The words sounded even uglier in his voice than they had in hers. Maybe because he removed all the frosting from them. He repeated them plainly. Without excuse. Without the nervous laughter that had accompanied them in the lobby. Just the sentence itself, stripped down to what it was. Across from me, Vanessa gave a small laugh that died almost instantly. "I didn't mean it like that." Richard's expression did not change. "You meant it exactly as it landed." Brian looked down at his plate. One of my cousins shifted in his seat. Aunt Denise stared at the tablecloth like she was suddenly deeply interested in linen texture. It struck me then how many family systems survive on the assumption that everyone present will prefer discomfort over interruption. The minute one person refuses that arrangement, the whole structure shows its wiring. Vanessa tried again, and this time her voice had the first edge of panic in it. It was a joke. It got out of hand. No, Richard said. A joke requires shared amusement. What you did was public humiliation. My mother leaned forward then, both hands near her napkin, and said in a controlled voice, Richard, I think we should discuss this privately. He looked at her for a beat, then said, Was the lobby private? That shut her up. I remember feeling my pulse in my wrists. Not because I was afraid, because I was witnessing something I had never fully believed I would see. Not revenge, not a meltdown. Accountability in complete sentences. Richard reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I recognized it immediately as more symbolic than necessary. He did not need notes. Richard was not a man who forgot the important numbers in a room, but the paper changed the atmosphere anyway. It made the moment feel less emotional and more official. He unfolded it. I want to be clear, he said. This is not about one dinner or one hotel reservation. This is about years of entitlement, performance, and dependence being mistaken for achievement. And it ends tonight. For the first time, Vanessa went visibly pale. My mother whispered, Please don't do this here. He did not even look at her when he answered. This is exactly where it belongs. Then he read from the page. Effective immediately, all discretionary financial support I have been providing to Linda Bennett and the Harris household will cease. Linda Bennett. My mother. He used her full name the way people do in formal notices and legal conversations. Not cruelly. Precisely. No one breathed. He continued, That includes the monthly transfer arrangement initiated in February 2022. It includes the school tuition supplement for Lily Harris currently paid through the end of this term. It includes any future assistance, direct or indirect, related to mortgage support, seasonal deficits, travel costs, credit balancing, or discretionary purchases. Brian's head came up so fast it was almost a flinch. Vanessa stared at Richard like she had stopped understanding English halfway through the sentence. My mother's lips parted, then closed again. I knew, in broad strokes, that Richard had been helping. I had not known the extent, and judging by the faces around the table, neither had several other relatives. A couple of them looked from my mother to Vanessa and back again with the stunned expression people get when the invisible scaffolding behind a beautiful wall suddenly becomes visible. Brian spoke first. Sir, he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word, I think there may be some misunderstanding about what was temporary and what was expected? Richard asked. Brian stopped. Richard folded the page once over his finger, but did not put it away. Yes, he said, that is the problem. Vanessa finally found her voice. You can't just announce this at dinner. Richard looked at her. And yet yesterday you felt perfectly comfortable announcing your sister's worth in a hotel lobby. She opened her mouth and shut it again. My mother tried a different angle. This is cruel, she said, very softly, like softness itself could prove the point. Lily is a child. Richard's face remained calm, but there was steel in it now. Then perhaps the adults in her life should have thought about that before building a household around money they treated as guaranteed, while teaching her to look down on the one person at this table actually living within her own means. That line changed the room. Not because it was louder, because it touched the truth no one there could comfortably deny. Living within her own means. That was the irony at the center of everything. They had used my ordinary life as proof I lacked ambition. My smaller apartment, my freelance work, my careful budgeting, my older car, my practical decisions. They had treated visible restraint like failure because they were standing inside borrowed cushion the whole time. Vanessa started crying then. Not gracefully, not quietly. It was the sharp, involuntary crying of somebody who is not prepared for a world in which consequences arrive in front of witnesses. Mascara did not run, because women like my sister buy the kind that survives tears. But her face changed completely. The polish cracked. Claire is loving this, she said, looking straight at me for the first time all evening. It was such a familiar move that I almost felt tired more than hurt. Even now, in the middle of her own collapse, she wanted me carrying something for her. I met her eyes and said, "No, I just stopped helping you pretend." That was the only thing I said. And it was enough. The silence after it was different from the silences before. Before, the room had been waiting for Richard. Now it was absorbing what had already landed. Brian rubbed a hand over his mouth. "We need to discuss this outside." Again with the private escape hatch. Again with the instinct to move consequences out of sight. Richard shook his head once. "No. You needed to think privately before you let public arrogance become a family habit." My mother's composure finally slipped.
"What do you want from us?" she asked, and her voice had a tremor in it now.
"An apology? Fine. Vanessa was wrong. I should have said something. But you are humiliating us." Richard answered her with a calm that almost made the sentence harsher. "No," he said. "I am removing myself from subsidizing people who humiliate others while calling it superiority." He let that sit. Then he turned slightly, not toward me exactly, but toward the side of the table where I was seated. "The only person at this table who has consistently lived honestly is Claire," he said. "She works. She pays her own way. She does not build a personality out of appearances, and the fact that some of you mistook that for failure says more about your standards than her life." I did not know where to look. That may sound strange, but public vindication is not always comfortable when you have spent years being cast as the one who should quietly absorb the room. I felt exposed, not in a humiliating way, but in the unsettling way truth can feel when it is finally named out loud in front of people who benefited from denying it. Aunt Denise cleared her throat and reached for her water glass. One of my cousins looked down as if he had just realized every casual assumption he had ever made about me was built on inherited shorthand. Even the server who eventually came in to remove a plate moved more carefully, as though she understood she had entered a room where something formal had already happened even if she did not know the details. Vanessa looked from Richard to my mother to Brian, searching for somebody to stop the slide. No one could. That was the thing about systems built on private support and public image. Once the support is named publicly, the image stops being solid. It becomes theater set, painted structure. Beautiful from the audience, weak from the side. My mother tried one final time. "Richard," she said, "please. You are blowing up this family over one ugly moment." He gave her a long look, not angry, just finished. "No," he said. "I'm refusing to finance the values that produced it." Then he folded the paper again, placed it back in his jacket pocket, picked up his water glass, and sat down. The entire room stayed frozen for a second longer. Then, in the quietest voice of the night, he said, "Happy Thanksgiving." Nobody touched dessert. The pianist was still playing outside, something bright and useless. Inside the dining room, silverware lay untouched beside plates that had gone cold. Vanessa kept dabbing at her face with a napkin that was too soft to help. Brian stared straight ahead. My mother looked smaller than I had ever seen her, though not softer. Smaller in the way people look when the story they have been standing inside starts collapsing faster than they can patch it. I did not gloat. That part matters. I did not feel victorious in any loud, cinematic way. Mostly I felt strange and steady and deeply awake, like I had stepped out of a room with bad air and only just realized how long I had been breathing it. After a few minutes, people began making excuses to leave. Aunt Denise said she had a headache. One cousin claimed he needed to check on his kids. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. The table unraveled in clumsy little pieces. Brian was the first of the three of them to stand. He leaned down toward Richard and said something too low for me to hear. Richard did not answer. Vanessa stood next. She looked at me once, just once, and there was nothing polished in her face anymore. Only shock, anger, and the first raw edge of fear. Then she walked out without a word, my mother following a few seconds later in rigid silence. The dining room felt almost peaceful after they left. Richard sat back in his chair and finally exhaled like a man who had been carrying something heavy for longer than he should have. I reached for my water because suddenly my throat felt dry. He looked at me and said, very simply, "You all right?" I thought about the lobby, the front desk clerk, the suitcase handle in my palm, my mother's silence, Vanessa's smile, then this room, this table, the witnesses, the truth standing where their story used to stand. "Yes," I said. And for the first time, I meant it. But dinner was only the correction. The fallout had not even started yet. The first phone call came the next morning at 7:12. I know the exact time because I was already awake, sitting in the little armchair by the window in my room with coffee in one hand and my laptop open on the table beside me. I had a client deck to revise the following Monday, and there was something oddly comforting about seeing unfinished work waiting for me. Deadlines, notes, a structure that still made sense. My mother's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. Then came Vanessa. Then Brian. By the time I showered and packed, there were 11 missed calls and 6 texts, all variations of the same demand. Call me. We need to talk. This has gone too far. Please fix this. Vanessa's message was the clearest, which made it the ugliest. I cannot believe you sat there and let him do that to us. I read it twice and felt something inside me go very quiet again, the same way it had in the lobby, not because I was shocked anymore, because she was still telling the truth by accident. In her mind, I had let consequences happen, not caused them, not invented them, let them happen by failing to stop them. That had always been my role in the family. Emotional custodian, quiet cleaner, the one expected to absorb the spill before anyone else had to see it. I didn't answer. I checked out of the hotel at 10. Richard met me in the lobby on the way out. Not the same place where I had stood 2 days earlier with no room and a suitcase in my hand, but close enough that I noticed the orchids again. Same polished floor. Same bright light through the glass. Same carefully neutral front desk smile from the staff. Only now, the air felt different to me. Not kinder, just clearer. Richard insisted on riding with me to the airport. On the drive there, he did not spend the time criticizing my mother or Vanessa or replaying the dinner line by line. That was another reason I trusted him. He did not feed on other people's collapse. He asked whether I had enough work lined up for December. I said yes. He asked whether I was still thinking about raising my rates in the new year. I said probably. He nodded and said, "You should." That was his way. Then, about 15 minutes from the terminal, he said something I still think about. Do not confuse their panic with your responsibility. I looked out the passenger window at the line of palms and hotel signs blurring past and said, I'm trying not to. They will make that difficult, he said. They've had years of practice. He was right. The first email from Brian came 4 days later. Not a text. An email. That told me he wanted distance from emotion and proximity to wording. People write emails when they still hope language can manage a crisis money no longer can. His subject line was simple. I'm asking sincerely. I opened it standing in my kitchen after dinner with a dish towel in one hand. He wrote that things were more unstable than I understood. He said Richard's decision had immediate effects beyond what was said at the table. He said the bank had begun asking for updated information related to a financing review. He said certain assumptions they had built their planning around no longer applied. He said Vanessa was overwhelmed and not sleeping well. He ended by asking whether I thought Richard would reconsider if enough time passed and if everyone approached this with humility. I remember reading that sentence and thinking how fascinating it was that humility had finally entered the room only after leverage left it. I did not reply. The next week, my mother changed tactics. At first, she called angry. The second voicemail accused me of turning family pain into punishment. The third said I had always resented Vanessa and was finally getting what I wanted. The fourth was quieter and more dangerous because it sounded almost reasonable. She said, You know your uncle listens to you differently. You could calm this down if you wanted to. That one bothered me most because it was built on the old logic. Your power is only acceptable if you use it to protect the people who hurt you. When anger failed, she pivoted to sorrow. Her voice got softer. She mentioned Lily. She mentioned school. She mentioned stress. She said Vanessa and Brian were under enormous pressure. She said everyone was suffering. Not once in those early calls did she say, I was wrong. Not once did she say, I should never have let that happen. She described the fire over and over without mentioning who struck the match. 2 weeks later, I heard from one of my cousins that Lily would be leaving her private school at the end of the term. The tuition support Richard had referenced at dinner had apparently been part of a larger monthly structure I had only partly understood. Without it, things tightened fast. Then Vanessa's social media went quiet. That may sound shallow, but in families like mine, silence on social media can be more revealing than an argument at the table. Vanessa had always posted through everything: beach dinners, matching holiday pajamas, grateful captions under carefully staged photos of centerpieces and front porches and anniversary brunches. Her online life had the same quality as the resort lobby that afternoon, polished enough that strangers assumed the story was complete. Then suddenly, nothing. No Thanksgiving recap. No December decorating reel. No Christmas family portrait. Just absence. A month after the trip, my mother left me a voicemail on a Friday night that I still remember almost word for word. Claire, please. Natalie is falling apart. Natalie. Not Vanessa. She always used Vanessa's given name when she wanted to sound maternal and vulnerable at the same time. She's under so much pressure, and Lily doesn't understand what's happening. If not for me, then for your niece. Please speak to Richard. I'm begging you. I listened to that voicemail sitting at my kitchen counter in Austin with a bowl of pasta going cold in front of me and one lamp on in the living room. For a few seconds, the old reflex came back. Not forgiveness. Not even pity exactly. Just reflex. The trained instinct to smooth things over before the family fully breaks. Be the easier daughter. Be the one who sees nuance. Be the one who accepts that other people's cruelty somehow becomes your emergency if a child might feel the consequences of it. Then I thought about the lobby again. The front desk clerk avoiding my eyes. My mother standing there close enough to hear every word. Vanessa saying I did not deserve a room, a dinner, a place. And I understood something I wish I had understood years earlier. Compassion is not the same as volunteering to be used, so I called my mother back. She answered on the first ring, as if she had been holding the phone in her hand. Claire? I kept my voice calm. I didn't do this. There was a silence on the line, and then she said, Please don't be cold. Cold. That word again. Women are called cold when they stop leaking warmth into broken systems. I'm not being cold, I said. I'm being accurate. She started crying then, quietly at first, and if this had happened 5 years earlier, it would have worked on me. Not because I was foolish, because daughters are trained for a long time to hear a mother cry as a summons. But that night I heard something else too. I heard the shape of a woman who still wanted relief without truth. I said, I can't fix something I didn't break. She inhaled sharply like I had slapped her. Then she whispered, I hope someday you understand what family means. I almost laughed, but I was too tired. I do? I said. That's the problem. Then I hung up. That was the first boundary I ever set with my mother that did not include an explanation she could use against me later. Over the next 2 months, the rest of the fallout reached me in pieces. Brian was trying to renegotiate their mortgage terms. A credit line had become harder to manage without the quiet financial cushion behind it. The house might need to be refinanced, maybe sold. There were fights now, loud enough that relatives heard about them from neighbors and mutual friends instead of from the family grapevine directly. My mother downsized in early February. She told people she was simplifying. That was her preferred word whenever she had no control over the scale of a change. Simplifying. As if losing comfort by force and choosing clarity were the same thing. And through all of it, my life kept doing something almost embarrassingly ordinary. It stabilized. That winter, one of my healthcare clients expanded my contract after a messaging project performed better than expected. A software startup I had been consulting for signed me into a longer retainer. My income did not explode. This was not a fantasy. It simply became more reliable. One Sunday in January, I updated my budget spreadsheet at my kitchen table with coffee beside me and rain tapping lightly against the windows. When I finished, I realized I had crossed a savings number I used to imagine as abstract and far away. No one applauded. No one posted about it. No one sent flowers or wrote a caption under a filtered photo. I just sat there in my apartment in socks and an old sweatshirt and let myself feel quietly proud. It was one of the cleanest moments of my adult life. Not because I had won, because I had built something that did not depend on anybody else's approval, performance, or rescue to remain standing. Richard called sometimes that winter, never to gossip, mostly to ask practical questions. How's work? Are you charging enough? Have you thought about hiring occasional support? One afternoon, he said, You know what your sister never understood? I smiled because, with him, there was usually no benefit in pretending I didn't want to hear the answer. What? She thought success was whatever made strangers envy you fastest. I leaned back against the couch and listened. Then he added, Real success is what still stands after the applause leaves. That line stayed with me because it described not just Vanessa, but my mother too. Both of them had confused visible ease with actual strength for so long that they had lost the ability to tell one from the other. Around March, my mother started sending awkward little messages that circled accountability without fully landing on it. Life humbles people. I see some things differently now. I wish certain moments had gone another way. It was remarkable how hard she worked to stand near the sentence I was wrong without ever stepping into it. Vanessa's apology came later, a Tuesday evening in early spring. I remember because I was boiling pasta and listening to a podcast with one earbud in when my phone buzzed on the counter. Her message was simple. I've been thinking about what I said at the hotel. I know sorry doesn't undo it, but I've thought about it every day since. I stood there with a wooden spoon in my hand, reading it while steam clouded the kitchen window above the sink. Months earlier, I might have imagined that moment as dramatic, climactic, a chance to say something devastating and elegant and final. But by then, I didn't need drama from her anymore. I typed back 3 words. I know you have. Then I put the phone down and finished making dinner. That was all. Not because what she did was small. Not because trust had been repaired. And not because one apology, sent after consequences arrived, suddenly transformed years of contempt into insight. I answered that way because I no longer needed her pain to prove my worth. That was the real shift. My family had spent years using me as a comparison point. The less successful daughter, the unfinished woman, the one who made everyone else's visible life look more impressive by contrast. But once I stepped out of that role, once I stopped begging to be interpreted kindly by people invested in interpreting me poorly, something in the whole structure collapsed. They lost more than money that Thanksgiving. They lost their mirror. And once that happened, they had to look at themselves. I wish I could say all of this ended in reconciliation and healing and perfect understanding, but that would not be true. My mother and I speak rarely now. Polite messages, occasional updates, nothing intimate. Vanessa and I are not close. Maybe one day she will become someone I can know without armor. Maybe not. Richard and I stayed in touch. And me? By April, I started looking at flights again. Not for a family trip, just for myself. I booked 3 nights in Charleston for late May. Small hotel, window seat, my own card. My own reservation. My own room waiting under my own name. When the confirmation email hit my inbox, I stared at it for a second longer than necessary. Then I smiled. My old gray suitcase still sits in the back of my closet, cheap, scratched, unremarkable. I kept thinking about replacing it, but I haven't. I'm strangely fond of it now. Because the last time I wheeled it through a hotel lobby, someone told me I didn't deserve to travel with the family. The next time I rolled it across a polished floor, I would be going somewhere I chose, to a room nobody could take from me, on terms no one else controlled. And to me, that feels a lot more like success than anything they ever taught me to envy.